Billionaire's Contract. He only needed child from her. Episode 3. Melissa's POV. Melissa entered the lavish building and looked at the interiors nervously. She had never been to such a high-maintenance place, and she had no idea why had she landed here, when she had merely received a message that the owner of this company could help save her orphanage. She had been desperate to save her home, her children's home, and if this was the last hope, then she was ready. She would do anything to save her orphanage. Walking inside, she searched for the reception, and once she found it, she directly went up to her and asked for the boss's office. "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked, arrogantly, and Melissa fumbled for an answer. She surely didn't have an appointment, and what would she say? She got a message saying that the owner of this company would help her get back her orphanage, or that she had no idea who was this company's owner. Before she could answer, Rohit came there and looked at the receptionist, who now plastered a sweet smile on her face. "Melissa, right?" Ignoring the receptionist's flirty looks, he looked at Melissa, who just nodded, being tongue-tied. "That text was sent by me. Mr. Willingstone is waiting for you. I'll take you there," he said politely, and she gave him a grateful smile. As they reached outside his cabin, he knocked, and a "come in" was heard from the other side. Rohit smiled and gestured her to step inside. She smiled nervously at him, and after thanking him, she stepped inside. She gasped when she saw his office, because honestly, it was too dreamy for her. But she shouldn't focus on all this now. Shaking her head, she looked at the man who was now observing her intently. It made her uncomfortable, but she could not do anything about it. "You can sit," he said, and she obliged, looking anywhere but at him. She wasn't scared of him, but intimidated, definitely. He had this aura around him that made it impossible for her to get comfortable. "So, Ms. Melissa, you know that you're here because you want to save your orphanage, and I'm ready to help you." He started in his businesslike tone, and she looked at him with a serious expression. "I just have a make one call, and your orphanage will be saved," he declared. But she didn't jump in happiness like he had expected. Instead, she just stared at him. "But why? Why are you helping me? What do you want in return?" she asked. And he was certainly impressed because she looked all naive and innocent, but she was smart. "I don't like beating around the bush, so I'll come straight to the point. I want a child from you without marriage," he announced, and gauged her expressions, which gave away nothing. "So you want to get me pregnant and then give away my child to you?" she asked after 2 minutes. Her gaze didn't waver a bit as he leaned forward. "My child," he corrected before continuing. "I want an heir for my company, but I don't believe in marriage, so this arrangement," he explained while she calculated something in her mind. "But what about me?" She finally unasked the question that had been bugging her. He raised one eyebrow as if asking what about her. "You get your child and I leave. But then what about my reputation? My character, which will be questioned once I leave your premises." "Needless to say, it will be the end of me," she said calmly, but there was a fire in her eyes accusing him of such vile thing. "That can be a problem, but I assure you that if you agree to this, not even a word about you will be out in open. That is my lookout, and I will handle any media that will meddle in my life." The words were strong and stern, like him, but she was still skeptical. "You can take your time, but remember, Mr. Willingstone will not wait to demolish your place," he reminded, and her eyes snapped at him in helplessness. For 15 minutes they sat there staring at her, trying to read her answer while she could feel her heart sinking with every passing second. It was such a big step, and she didn't even have time to think about it. "I'm ready." With those words, she sold herself to the devil just for her kids. Just as soon as she agreed, Rohit was called in with the contract in his hand. He placed it on the desk and glancing at Melissa. Melissa knew that this man won't just take the words as guarantee. He will need it in writing. She just observed everything quietly as he picked up the contract and placed it in front of her. "Read this and sign it," he ordered, and she felt like glaring at him, but controlled her anger and picked up the papers. While she thoroughly went through that document, Nelson leaned back leisurely, and it was now that he noticed her attire, which was a simple white dress with the flower design on it. She definitely had no makeup on because it was clearly visible to him. No jewelry, hair left open, and a pair of chappals. Most certainly she was a wife material, but too bad he wasn't interested. "What is this clause, Mr. Willingston?" The anger was clear in her voice, and as he looked in her eyes, he was right. The fire was definitely present. "Why can't I meet my child whenever I want to? That's totally ridiculous." She was fuming, and he was calm. "As I said, I don't want any marriage, and so you will, nowhere, be associated with me or my child after you hand her over to me. I know a child needs the mother the most, but that won't be a problem because I will be arranging a nanny for the same," he said nonchalantly, and she curled up her fists. The nerve of this man. First, he denies her from meeting her own child, and now he's talking as if it's a thing they are trading. "I do not agree to this. Allow me to meet my child any time I want, without any restrictions. Only then I will sign this contract," she demanded, and he narrowed his eyes at her dangerously. "You do not have the right to demand anything from me. These are my rules, and you have to abide by them, or you can kiss goodbye to your orphanage," he threatened, and she gritted her teeth. Sure, she was desperate at the moment, but that didn't mean she was weak. He couldn't, and she would never allow him to walk all over her. "Fine then. You can keep your contract and find some other woman to abide by your rules. I will handle my problem very well," she snapped, standing up with a jerk, and turned around to leave. He was taken aback by her audacity to refuse him, even after his threat. But he couldn't let her leave because he knew that he won't be finding another woman like her who will agree to this. He hated to bend down in front of anyone, but this tiny woman forced him to for the first time. "Wait," he said, and she stopped in her tracks, but didn't turn around. "I will remove that clause," he announced, and she turned around to look at him. Although he looked normal, she could see the dangerous glint in his eyes. "But you won't be allowed to meet my child in the absence of my presence," he added, and she wished she could walk up to him and punch straight in his jaw. "What am I? A kidnapper who will abduct the child in your absence?" She gritted, and he shrugged in response. She sighed heavily and went back to the desk before picking up a pen. She eyed him suspiciously because there was still something being missed out. "You will be staying with me until you deliver the baby." He voiced out the unspoken, and she closed her eyes tightly. He was really testing her patience, but she knew he was right. How could she stay at hope when she will be pregnant? Without another word, she signed the document, and a satisfying smirk formed on his face. Finally, he would get what he really wants. Billionaire's Contract episode 4. Melissa's POV. Melissa reached hope after she agreed to the contract and found the board of Mr. Mittle's property already removed. She felt relief wash over her, but then the bigger problem was already waiting. "Melissa!" a voice called as soon as she stepped inside. She smiled as the person came and hugged her tight. "Our hope is now safe," her best friend exclaimed excitedly, and she looked around to see the kids dancing and laughing happily, which made her eyes misty. She definitely made the right decision. But something was wrong. On not receiving the expected reaction, her best friend looked at her suspiciously, and it made Melissa ashamed. "Melissa, look at me," she ordered, and Melissa bit her lip. How will she tell her best friend? "What did you do?" It was more like an order to tell her the truth. She looked at her, and then at the kids around, before holding her hand and dragging her to the nearby room. "I sold myself," she blurted out, and Sarah, her best friend, looked at her shocked. The next day, Melissa found out that Nelson had sent some of his men to take her luggage to his mansion. She rolled her eyes at that, and only allowed the driver to take her to his mansion because, honestly, she didn't have much than 2 bags. As she sat in the car, she thought about her conversation with Sarah. After explaining everything to her, needless to say, she was downright furious. And who wouldn't be? Any sane person would never agree to such a contract. That is, if he didn't have a weakness. Sarah refused to let her go to the devil. But Melissa couldn't do anything. She was bound. She could not back out now because he had fulfilled his part of the deal. Now it was her turn. So yesterday night, after her best friend refused to talk with her or even acknowledge her presence, she cried in her embrace, which was the breaking point, and both the women cried hard for what destiny was playing at. "Ma'am, we have reached." The driver was already standing at her side with the door held open. She sighed and got out, looking at the mansion in front of her. It was magnificent. "Excuse me, sir. Please don't call me ma'am because I'm quite younger to you. And next time if you drive me somewhere, please don't open the door for me as well. I can do it on my own." She smiled politely at the driver, who looked flabbergasted at her request. She then picked up her bags and moved towards the entrance, where 2 women were already waiting for her at the doorstep. They tried taking her bags from her hand, but she refused and carried them on her own. She looked around to find Nelson, however, he was nowhere in sight. Of course he wouldn't want to entertain her except for the nights. She scoffed in her mind and waited for one of the maids to show her the room. "This way, Mom." She made a helpless face at being called Mom yet again. She has never been comfortable with these words, simply because all her life she's been called by her name. Once they reached inside her room, the maid turned to leave but was stopped by her. She put her bags down and faced her. "Thank you. And please call me Melissa." She smiled, but the maid didn't, and just gaped at her, making her frown. What was wrong? Without another word, the maid hurriedly bowed before her and left, leaving her confused and surprised as well. She shook her head and looked at the room. It was quite spacious, according to her, and lavish was definitely added. There was a king-size bed in the middle of the room. At least to her it was king-sized, and to its left a door, probably the bathroom. Next to the door was the closet, and what she loved the most was on the right of the room. It was a bookshelf, and just 5 steps ahead, a window with a small seating below it. It was kinda perfect for her, and she absolutely loved it. Walking towards the bed, she sat down on it first, and then sprawled across it. She almost moaned at the softness of the bed, and next thing she knew, she was being pulled in the darkness. Nelson and Philip were on their way to Nelson's mansion, and Philip was truly shocked that he had already found the suitable woman. "Are you serious that you found a woman who agreed to give you a baby and asked for no money, nothing in return?" Philip asked, not believing his ears. Were there such type of woman in this world? "For the last time, I did help her by saving her orphanage. So it is give and take. Now shut the fuck up before I kick you out of this moving car." He threatened, but Philip just rolled his eyes in return. He wondered if there was another side to this story. Soon they reached the mansion and Nelson was informed that she was already in her room. He asked Philip to wait while he had a chat with her. He knocked on the door but got no reply in return. He tried one more time before twisting the knob and pushing the door open. She laid there on the bed, sleeping soundly, and he stared at her for a few seconds before closing the door and going back in the living room. "She's asleep," he informed, and Philip nodded as they sat on the couch. Nelson was thinking about how he had asked Rohit to cancel that particular clause just after Melissa left. If he wanted, he could have let it be included because she had already signed it. But he has never played ugly until the opponent starts the game. "What are you thinking?" Philip asked as he saw Nelson lost in his thoughts. "She agreed to the contract, but not before I agreed to one of her conditions," he revealed, and Philip sat straight, looking excited suddenly. He rubbed his hands together and with an over-smiley face waited for him to explain further. "She wanted me to remove the clause where I refused the mother to meet her child after she hands him to me," he said, and Philip was impressed with the unknown woman already. "So, did you threaten her?" he asked, knowing Nelson's reaction. Nelson just nodded stiffly and drank the water which was kept on the table. "I did, but then she refused to agree and I had to oblige," he ended and leaned back on the couch. But Philip was far from relaxed. "Whoa, so you are saying that a woman made Nelson Willingstone agree to her condition? Did she really?" He smiled cheerfully, and Nelson gave him a blank look. "I have to meet her now," he announced and stood up. But before that, Melissa was already walking in the living room, taking both men's attention. Billionaire's Contract episode 5. Melissa's POV. Melissa woke up abruptly without any disturbance, and she looked around at the unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, a fear gripped her heart, not knowing where she was. But then slowly she remembered about how she entered the contract and landed here in his mansion. She sighed and got up, moving towards the bathroom to freshen up. Even the bathroom was spacious, and she could just gawk at it after entering inside. God, what had she gotten herself into? After she freshened up, she decided to go in the living room and explore the mansion. But as soon as she entered the room, she found Nelson present there along with an unknown man. "Hello, sister-in-law. I'm so glad to finally meet the woman who can make Nelson Willingstone work according to her," Philip said dramatically, and Melissa was taken aback. She glanced at Nelson and found him giving a hard stare to the overexcited man. "Philip." There was a warning in his tone, but seems like he was no bothered because he came forward and made her sit on the couch. So let's ignore this person and focus on me, he exclaimed, and beside him Nelson took out his phone because he really wasn't interested in his nonsense talks. So, let me ask you the one thing that I have been dying to ask. Are you really ready to do this? He asked seriously, and Melissa shifted uncomfortably. Nelson's head snapped in Philip's direction with his jaw clenched. She has to be. Because if not, I can sue her for breaching the contract. He spoke in a hard tone, somewhat glaring at Philip for making her rethink her decision. Don't worry, Mr. Willingstone. I won't back out, now that you have fulfilled your part of the deal. She spoke for the first time, and Nelson looked at her. Philip sighed, rubbing his nape when Nelson stood up, of a sudden, startling them both. You both can chat all you want, but some other time. Philip, you should leave, he said curtly, and Melissa gave him a disbelieving look. What if I don't? Philip challenged daringly. But Nelson paid no heed. Melissa was a silent spectator to all the drama. Then I will throw you out. He stood up and walked, in front of Nelson. You! He poked a finger at him. Throw out? His lower lip wobbled, and Melissa couldn't control any longer as she burst out laughing. Both the men stared at her, one with a soft smile on his face, while the other with a cold face. Feeling their gazes, she stopped and composed herself. After Philip left performing his small drama, Nelson left for his room without another word, and Melissa decided to do what she had come for, exploring the mansion. She roamed around for more than 45 minutes, but the exploration was still left. Exhausted, she decided to eat something first, but the way to the kitchen was unknown. She came back to the living room, looked around for a maid. Miss Melissa. She turned around with a jerk and found Nelson standing there in his casual wear and freshened up. She couldn't help but stare at his torso, which was clearly visible due to his t-shirt. She wondered if he was a fan of the color black, because he was always wearing black. Shall we discuss some important aspects of this arrangement? He raised his eyebrows and she made a face, because she was hungry. No, we shall not. I'm hungry, she declared hungrily, and tried to walk past him, but he held her hand a bit tightly to stop her. I won't tolerate disobedience in my house. His voice was edgy, and without turning around, she knew he was on the brink of losing his temper. And I can't tolerate my stomach empty, she retorted, tightening her head to glare at him. He stared at her long and hard, making her squirm in his hold. Vikram, he called, not looking away, and she could feel her heart beating fast. A man came running in the room the next second and bowed in front of them. Make something healthy and bring it to my study in 15 minutes, he ordered, and without waiting for a reply, dragged Melissa to his study while she couldn't comprehend what had happened. Only when the door was shut, she realized that they had reached in his study room and he had already left her hand. She looked around, looking at the black walls and then at his desk, somewhat similar to his office at the company. Stare at it later. You're going to be here for a long time. Right now, come and sit here, he ordered, and she glared at him, not moving an inch. Stop ordering me. I'm not your servant or your employee. In fact, we are two equal persons in this contract, she snapped, and she could see his jaw clenching, but he said nothing. You are given a separate room only for now, even though it wasn't necessary. But once you get pregnant, you'll be staying with me in my room. He started, and she crossed her hands, staring at him. I hope you know that. For having a baby, we are supposed to have sexual intercourse. And I am expecting that you are ready for that, because honestly, I wouldn't want to waste any of my time. He looked at her expressions, which gave away nothing, so he continued. You don't need to worry, because once you are pregnant, I won't touch you in that way. He said coldly, but this time she was fuming from inside. She knew they were supposed to have sex, and although she wasn't ready, she was trying to prepare herself. But this jerk was talking in such a monotone that it felt like a robot was talking. Are you done listing your essential points? She asked, and he gave her a cold stare which she ignored, learning from Philip. First of all, I know we need to have sex, and let me inform you that I am a virgin. So if you don't like that, then tell me right now, because there are other ways to get me pregnant. She shrugged, indicating at the IVF solution. And secondly, I'm least bothered about having any kind of relationship with you, so I don't expect anything from you, she stated, and he got up from his chair and stalked towards her. That's good for you. And virgin or not, I don't care because I'm not going for the IVF treatment. He whispered huskily in her ear, making her shiver involuntarily. There was a knock on the door, and the food trolley was brought in. Melissa was staring at the food when she felt him lean onto her as his hot breath fanned her neck. Have your meal, because you'll be needing energy for tonight, he whispered, and she was already breathing heavily. But after he left the study, her eyes widened as she recalled his words. Tonight? TBC, thumbs up.